No one in the lobby noticed the farmer at first. He didn't look like someone who belonged there. Ethan Moore pushed through the revolving glass doors of the Sterling Crown Hotel, a place polished to perfection. His boots left faint trails of dried soil on the marble floor. His jeans were clean but faded from years of sun. His hands were the kind of hands that built things, rough, strong, stained by the earth. He carried a brown leather folder under his arm. Inside it, a reservation confirmation for the penthouse suite. 2 nights. Paid in full, $1,700. The air smelled like lemon wax and wealth. A crystal chandelier caught the afternoon light and fractured it into gold. Behind the desk, the guest services manager straightened his tie. His name was Richard Hale. Tall, sharp jawline, the kind of man who believed first impressions told him everything he needed to know about a person. Ethan stepped forward. "Good afternoon." Checking in. Moore. Richard didn't touch the keyboard. His eyes scanned Ethan from boots to calloused knuckles, to the faint dirt under his nails. "I'm sorry," Richard said, his voice smooth as glass, "but I think you might be in the wrong place." Ethan blinked, unsure what that meant. "I have a reservation. Penthouse suite, code SJ47502. He held out the printed receipt. Richard's polite smile never reached his eyes. "Sir, the rooms here start at $400 a night. Our penthouse is $1,700. I'm afraid we don't have availability." A woman in heels behind Ethan shifted, pretending not to listen. 2 bellhops paused mid-step. The lobby quieted, the way a forest does before lightning strikes. Ethan frowned. "I already paid." He opened the folder and laid the receipt flat on the counter. "Right here." Richard didn't look. "Sir, please. This establishment maintains a certain standard. If you'd like, I can recommend a hotel better suited to your needs." There it was. The hesitation before needs. The invisible line drawn in the marble. Someone near the elevator whispered, "Is he serious?" Ethan's jaw tensed. He'd been judged before. By bankers who thought dirt under fingernails meant debt. By salesmen who thought a truck with mud on the tires meant poverty. But something about this felt different, public, final. He reached slowly into his jacket. Richard's shoulders stiffened. The guards near the door shifted. But all Ethan pulled out was his phone. He pressed record. "For the record," he said, voice low but firm, "it's 2:31 in the afternoon, on September 18th, 2025. I'm Ethan Moore. I've paid for a room at the Sterling Crown Hotel. And this man," he pointed gently toward the counter, "is refusing to check me in." Richard's color drained. "Sir, you can't film on private property." "This is a public accommodation," Ethan replied, "and I'm documenting your refusal." Every word was calm. Every sentence measured. That's what made it powerful. Behind Ethan, a bellhop froze watching. Another guest, a middle-aged woman with an expensive purse, whispered, "That's discrimination." Ethan didn't flinch. "Would you like to repeat what you said about my kind not fitting your standards?" Richard's lips parted, then shut again. "Security will be here any moment." "Good," Ethan said. "Let's make sure they see exactly what kind of service you provide." He kept the camera steady. The air in the lobby grew heavy, filled with the tension of decades. When security arrived, it wasn't who Richard expected. The guard was a quiet man named Marcus Lee, built like a wall but with eyes that saw through people's masks. He listened to both sides. Then, without a word, he walked around the counter and typed something into the computer. He turned the screen toward Richard. "Reservations right here," Marcus said. "Paid, verified, penthouse suite, 2 nights." Silence hit like thunder. Guests stared. A woman near the fountain whispered. He was telling the truth. Richard's throat moved, searching for an escape. "That must be a system error," Ethan exhaled. "System error." He picked up his phone. "Or bias?" The moment froze. One man armed with truth, the other with excuses. Marcus looked at Richard. "You owe this gentleman an apology." Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. Ethan closed his folder, nodded to Marcus, and said quietly, "Thank you." Then he turned toward the doors. The lobby parted for him like water. No one said a word. But every eye followed him out. Outside, the air was cooler. He sat in his truck, started the engine, and stared at his hands. They weren't shaking. Not yet. He opened his phone, trimmed the clip, and uploaded it. One sentence as a caption: Sterling Crown Hotel, 2:31 p.m. Make of it what you will. Within an hour, 10,000 people already had, and by midnight, Ethan Moore's life and the hotel's would never be the same. The video spread faster than Ethan imagined. Within 3 hours, strangers were tagging news stations, sharing screenshots, arguing in comment threads. Some praised his calm, others doubted his story, but most agreed on one thing: the recording was undeniable. You could hear Richard's voice, smooth and dismissive, saying, "We have standards." By morning, the video had 500,000 views. Ethan's phone buzzed until the battery died. Journalists wanted interviews. Lawyers offered free consultations. And buried among the chaos were hundreds of messages from people who said, "This happened to me too." But while the world was waking up to the story, Ethan's day began the way it always did, before sunrise. He walked through the fog that rolled over his fields, the wet grass brushing against his boots. The air smelled like promise and work. He touched the leaves of the tomato plants, checked moisture levels, and whispered to the earth the same way his father once did. His family had tilled this soil for 3 generations. More farms had survived droughts, bad harvests, and market crashes, but it had never faced something like this. Inside the farmhouse, his daughter Lily stood at the stove. She was 16, sharp-tongued and protective in a way only daughters of quiet fathers can be. "You really blew up the internet, Dad," she said, sliding a plate of eggs across the counter. "I didn't mean to," Ethan replied. Lily folded her arms. "That guy deserved it. Everyone's talking about you. Some people at school think you're lying, though." Ethan sat weary already. "It doesn't matter what they think. The truth doesn't need an audience to be real." She looked at him for a long moment. "You always told me to keep my paperwork, right? Why?" "Because, Lily," he said softly, "some people don't see legitimacy when they look at us. They see stereotypes, so I carry proof. Every contract, every tax statement, every deed. It's not pride. It's protection." Lily frowned. "That's messed up. It's the world," he said. "But it doesn't get to define us." Later that morning, Ethan sat in his office, an old barn converted into a workspace filled with papers, tools, and photos of the land his grandfather cleared by hand. He scrolled through the flood of messages. One stood out. "Hi, Ethan. My name's Rachel Hart. I'm an investigative journalist. I've been following discrimination cases in hospitality for almost a year. What happened to you fits a pattern. Can we talk?" He hesitated. He wasn't looking for fame. He just wanted fairness, but something in her tone felt honest, grounded. He typed back, "Sure. Tomorrow morning." By the time he closed his laptop, another notification popped up. A news anchor had replayed his clip on live television. Commentators debated his motives. Some said he wanted attention. Others called him brave. But the truth was simpler. He just wanted acknowledgement. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house reminded him of what he'd started. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was a symbol in a story that was growing beyond his control. At dawn, he drove into town. The roads were quiet, the sky a thin gray. He parked outside a small cafe where Rachel was already waiting with a laptop and too much caffeine. She was young, maybe 30, with a restless energy in her eyes. "I watched your video a dozen times," she said, shaking his hand. "You handled that perfectly. Calm, controlled, that's rare." "I didn't want to lose my temper," Ethan said. "That's what they expect," Rachel nodded. "Good, because this might get uglier before it gets better." She opened her laptop, and there, on the screen, were complaint records, emails, screenshots, and statements from other guests at the Sterling Crown. 11 different cases. 11 people of color turned away or downgraded despite confirmed reservations. Same manager, same language, same excuse, system error. Ethan leaned forward. "How long have you had this?" "Months," Rachel said. No one would talk on record. They were scared. "You changed that?" She clicked another folder. "I also have internal emails from a former employee. They used phrases like guest fit and appearance standards. They were told to protect the brand image. That's coded discrimination. Plain and simple." Ethan felt something heavy settle in his chest. It wasn't shock. It was validation mixed with fury. "They trained them to do this." "Exactly," Rachel said. "But there's more. The hotel chain gets a big chunk of revenue from a luxury travel company, Heritage Voyages. Their clientele? Almost exclusively white retirees. The Sterling Crown reserves entire floors for them. Employees get bonuses based on guest satisfaction scores from Heritage clients. Ethan rubbed his jaw. So they had a financial reason to keep people like me out, Rachel nodded. And if we can prove that, it's not just discrimination. It's fraud. He leaned back, silent for a long time. The hum of the cafe filled the space between them. Finally, he said, "If we do this, they'll come after me." "They already have," she said. "But you've got something they can't control, the truth." "And now you've got me." Ethan smiled faintly. "All right, let's dig." That night, while the internet argued, Ethan Moore and Rachel Hart began to pull at a thread that would unravel far more than a single manager's prejudice. They would find proof buried deep inside the company's own files. Proof of bonuses tied to exclusion, proof of policies disguised as preferences, and proof that what happened in that lobby wasn't an accident. It was design, and once the truth starts moving, it doesn't stop. By the next sunrise, the story had outgrown the internet. It was about to reach the courtroom. The next few days moved like a storm that refused to end. Ethan barely slept. Every time his phone buzzed, a new wave of messages, requests, or threats arrived. The hotel's corporate office released a short statement calling it a miscommunication. Their spokesperson claimed they were investigating the matter. But behind the polished words, something darker was happening. By Thursday, Rachel uncovered emails from inside Sterling Crown's regional office. They weren't written for public eyes. The language was slick-coded, but the meaning was sharp as a blade. Phrases like ensure guest harmony, preserve brand perception, and maintain traditional clientele balance. Rachel tapped her screen. "These aren't accidents, Ethan, they're policies. They trained employees to discriminate without saying the word." Ethan stared at the laptop. "And Richard Hale was just following those orders." "Exactly. They rewarded him for it." Rachel opened another document, a spreadsheet marked Incentive Reports 2024. Each row listed names, dates, bonuses. Richard's name appeared 6 times, each tied to Heritage Voyages partnership performance. His pay had increased 18% that year. Rachel's voice softened. "They paid him to make people like you feel small." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. The air in the cafe felt heavy. He thought of Lily, of every lesson he'd tried to teach her about working hard and staying honest. And now he wondered how to explain that truth alone wasn't always protection. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but cold. "Then we're taking this public," Rachel nodded. "I've already contacted 2 former employees who'll talk. One worked in IT. She has the internal training manual. Section 5.2, Guest Verification Standards. Wait till you read it." Ethan took the paper. The words hit like a punch. Guest attire must align with brand environment. Casual or work-related clothing may require additional verification before check-in. He whispered the words again. Work-related clothing. His voice shook slightly, the anger finally surfacing. They wrote it down. They institutionalized bias. Rachel said, "I showed it to a lawyer friend. She called it legalized discrimination. Said no real hospitality chain would ever approve language like this." Ethan looked out the window. The parking lot shimmered in the afternoon heat. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he took a deep breath. "We need to make sure no one can bury this." That night, Rachel published her first article. The headline hit like a drumbeat. "Pattern of discrimination emerges at Sterling Crown hotels." Within hours, it was trending. Other victims began coming forward, names appearing in her inbox faster than she could read them. 11 stories turned into 20. 20 turned into 34. Each had a familiar rhythm. Confirmed reservation, polite dismissal, coded insult, and a quiet humiliation that never made the news. By the weekend, the company's PR team scrambled. Their new statement claimed they were shocked by the allegations and had zero tolerance for discrimination. But reporters had already found their internal manual. The lie was collapsing. Sunday morning, Ethan received a FedEx envelope stamped with the logo of a law firm. 12 pages of legal intimidation. They demanded he remove all videos, issue a public apology, and pay damages for defamation. He read the letter 3 times. At the kitchen table, the light hit the paper just enough to make the words gleam like threats. Lily came downstairs, rubbing her eyes. "What's that?" Just another storm, he said. You're not going to quit, right? Ethan smiled faintly. No, baby. Not when the truth's finally growing roots. He sent a copy of the letter to Rachel. Within an hour, she called. That's textbook retaliation. I'll get you legal help. By nightfall, an attorney named Patricia Nguyen was on the phone with him. Her voice was steady, calm, confident. Mr. Moore, what they sent you is an intimidation tactic. Do not retract anything. Do not delete the video. Document every threat. It's going to help us later. Ethan rubbed his temple. They're trying to scare me into silence. That's exactly the point, Patricia said. And it's going to backfire. You have witnesses, video, and a pattern. That's not defamation. That's evidence. But fear wasn't the only weapon the company used. By Tuesday, 4 of the other victims received settlement offers. $15,000 each. Non-disclosure agreements attached. A simple deal, take the money, stay quiet, disappear. Rachel called Ethan, furious. They're trying to buy silence again, he sighed. Some will take it. I can't blame them. Not everyone can afford to fight. One woman did take it, a teacher named Jordan Brooks. She cried when she told Ethan, I just needed to pay my bills. I feel like I sold out. He told her the truth. You didn't sell out. They cornered you. There's a difference. But 3 others refused the money. One was a lawyer, one a delivery driver, one a retired nurse. All of them said the same thing. Enough. And that word carried power. Rachel gathered their statements, cross-checked the timelines, and by Wednesday night she had built a wall of proof no PR spin could touch. The pattern was undeniable, but the pressure on Ethan's life was mounting fast. His farm investors started to waver. One man withdrew a promised $250,000, citing reputational concerns. His bank called, saying they needed to review his credit line due to recent controversy. Ethan stood in his barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and old machinery, staring at the fields through the open doors. This land had never felt so fragile. The text came late that night. Unknown number. Final offer, $50,000, sign NDA, post-retraction. End it now. He stared at the message for a long time. $50,000 would solve a lot of problems. Legal fees, farm expenses, Lily's college fund. It would buy peace, but at the cost of truth. He put down the phone, his heart heavy. Then another message appeared, Rachel again. Don't do anything yet. Check your email. We found something big. Ethan opened the file. His eyes widened as he read. The document was a state audit report. A leak, 46 pages long. It detailed everything. Unreported income, secret commissions, performance bonuses tied to preferred clientele. The numbers didn't lie. The Sterling Crown hotel chain had falsified tax records. They weren't just guilty of discrimination. They were guilty of fraud. Ethan leaned back in his chair, breathing slowly. For the first time in weeks, the fear in his chest turned into resolve. They could buy silence. They could spin lies. But they couldn't erase the paper trail. He picked up his phone and called Rachel. We're not settling. Her voice on the other end was fierce and certain. Good. Because this just turned into something bigger than both of us. By sunrise, the truth had momentum. The audit was about to go public, and the company's secrets were seconds away from spilling into daylight. The fight was no longer about one man being turned away from a hotel. It was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong somewhere they had earned their place. And Ethan Moore was done waiting for permission to stand there. By the next morning, everything had changed. The state audit leaked online. Within hours, every major news outlet picked it up. The headlines were relentless. Sterling Crown accused of tax evasion. Emails reveal racial bias policies. CEO under investigation. The truth had spilled into daylight and no one could put it back in the bottle. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside him, watching the story unfold in real time. News anchors read excerpts from the audit. Experts debated accountability. Comment sections roared. Some still called him a troublemaker. Others called him brave. But all eyes were on Sterling Crown now. The audit exposed everything. The unreported income, the illegal partnership with Heritage Voyages, the coded emails that linked executive bonuses directly to guest satisfaction metrics. It even listed Richard Hale by name, identifying him as the company's primary contact for the Heritage deal. His bonus had jumped 18% that year. Just as the number of rejected reservations mysteriously increased, Ethan didn't feel triumph. He felt gravity. The weight of what he'd uncovered pressed against his chest. This wasn't just about humiliation in a hotel lobby anymore. It was about a system built to hide behind manners and policies while profiting from quiet cruelty. Rachel called. Her voice was electric with adrenaline. It's everywhere. Every network, every paper. You did it. We did it, Ethan said. Now what? Now, she replied. We make sure they can't bury this in court. That same afternoon, the company released another statement. Their CEO, Paul Strickland, said, "The Sterling Crown Group condemns all forms of discrimination. Any misconduct by employees does not represent our values." But buried in the same press release was a single line that caught Rachel's attention. Our internal review shows isolated incidents unrelated to company policy. She read it aloud to Ethan. They're trying to pin everything on Richard. He shook his head. He was guilty, sure. But he wasn't acting alone. Rachel smiled grimly. Then we proved that she already had. The next file she showed Ethan was a chain of internal emails between Strickland and his regional managers. The words were corporate poetry designed to sound harmless. Protect brand identity. Maintain guest profile consistency. But to anyone who had lived through what Ethan had, it was clear what they meant. By evening, the company's lawyers began sending takedown requests to news outlets. None worked. The story was too big, too fast, too public. At 7:30 that night, a community meeting formed in downtown Riverbend. No one planned it. People just showed up. Farmers, teachers, students, church leaders, many who had never met Ethan but felt like they knew him now. The auditorium filled until people were standing along the walls. When Ethan walked in, the room erupted in applause that rattled the rafters. He wasn't used to that kind of attention. He wasn't chasing it. But the warmth of it broke through the weeks of exhaustion and fear. Rachel stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand. "We're here because one man refused to stay silent," she said. "But this story belongs to everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong." The crowd roared again. Someone shouted, "Tell it, Ethan." He stepped forward slowly, the room quieting. "I didn't go to that hotel looking for a fight," he began. "I went there to rest, to prepare for a conference, but when a man looked at me and decided who I was before I spoke a word, I realized something. You can work your whole life to build something and still, someone will look at you and only see what they want to see. That's why I filmed it, not to start a war, but to prove that truth doesn't need permission." The silence after his words was louder than applause. A woman in the front row stood. "They did the same to me last year," she said. "Different hotel. Same excuse," another voice followed. "I was told my card was declined when it wasn't." And another. "They downgraded my room after seeing me." Each story stacked on top of the last until the room felt like it was vibrating with truth that had waited too long to be spoken. When it ended, a local pastor approached the microphone. "This isn't just about hotels," he said. "It's about dignity, and if we don't protect that for one man, none of us have it." People began pledging donations for Ethan's legal defense. $10 here, $1,000 there. By the end of the night, they'd raised nearly $80,000. Rachel set up a page online for those who couldn't be there in person. She called it Justice for More. The total hit 6 figures before sunrise. The next day, the Attorney General's office confirmed an official investigation. Sterling Crown was now facing potential civil rights and financial fraud charges. The company's stock price fell 7% overnight. Investors started pulling out. Ethan received another letter, this time from a different law firm representing the hotel's parent company. It was a new tactic: settle quietly, sign a non-disclosure agreement, take a large payout, and make it all disappear. Rachel read the offer aloud. $350,000. That's their price for silence. Ethan looked at the letter for a long time. "My grandfather used to say there are 2 kinds of crops," he said. "The ones you plant for profit and the ones you plant for legacy. This is the second kind," Rachel smiled. "Then let's finish the harvest." The court date came quickly. October 22nd, Circuit Court of Riverbend. Reporters filled the hallway. Cameras clicked like hailstones. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Ethan sat at the front beside his attorney, Patricia Nguyen. Across the room sat the company's executives, sharp suits and cold expressions. Paul Strickland didn't look at him once. The judge entered. The room rose. Proceedings began. Patricia started with Ethan's testimony. He told his story with the same quiet strength he had shown that day in the lobby. No theatrics. Just truth. The court listened in near silence as he described the encounter, the humiliation and the aftermath. Then the witnesses spoke. The retired nurse, the delivery driver, the lawyer, each described a similar experience at different hotels under the same chain. Each had been turned away or humiliated in subtle, polite ways that added up to the same message: you don't belong here. Finally, Rachel took the stand. She presented her investigation, the training manuals, the audit, the emails. Every sentence was another nail in the company's carefully built facade. When it was the defense's turn, their attorney tried to shift the blame. These were isolated incidents, he said. The company had no knowledge of bias. Patricia stood and asked a single question. Then why, she said. Did your CEO send an email instructing staff to maintain guest profile consistency? Immediately after renewing a contract with a company whose clientele was 98% white. The courtroom went still. The defense attorney hesitated, papers trembling in his hand. Those words were taken out of context. Patricia smiled slightly. Sometimes the truth doesn't need context. It just needs daylight. When the judge finally spoke, her words were clear and steady. This court finds sufficient evidence of discriminatory practice and financial misconduct. Sterling Crown is ordered to submit to independent oversight, public reporting of complaints, and mandatory restitution to affected guests. Further investigation into criminal liability is referred to the Attorney General. A collective exhale rippled through the courtroom. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. He didn't stop to answer them. He just looked up at the gray October sky and said softly, "That's enough." But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Within weeks, Paul Strickland resigned to pursue other opportunities. Richard Hale was banned from working in hospitality. The Sterling Crown Group issued a public apology, though it sounded more like strategy than remorse. Ethan's story spread far beyond Riverbend. It became a national conversation about quiet bias, about the invisible walls that divide people in everyday places. Lily wrote her college essay about it. She called it "The Day My Father Didn't Bow." And Ethan went back to his farm where the soil didn't care what clothes he wore or what people assumed when they looked at him. He worked with the same calm hands that had planted every seed of his life. But this time, when he looked at his fields, he saw more than crops. He saw proof that truth, when tended with patience, always grows into something that cannot be uprooted. The Sterling Crown lobby was renovated months later. New floors, new chandeliers, new management. But in the corners of that polished marble, echoes still lingered, words once spoken too easily. A man's calm defiance recorded forever. And somewhere between justice and memory, Ethan Moore became what he never set out to be. A reminder that dignity once claimed doesn't fade. It multiplies. He never called himself a hero. He never needed to. Because sometimes the strongest statement you can make is refusing to leave quietly. Winter came early that year. The frost moved across Ethan's fields like a quiet blanket, silvering the rows of bare vines. The farm looked asleep, but Ethan knew better. Beneath the soil, life was gathering strength, waiting for spring. He stood at the edge of his land one morning, the wind biting at his collar, watching the sunrise break over the hills. The phone in his pocket vibrated. He ignored it. For once, he just wanted silence, the kind that feels earned. But the world wasn't done with him yet. When he finally answered, it was Rachel. Her voice had that edge again, the sound of new information. "Ethan, I just got word. The Attorney General's office is opening a full-scale investigation into Sterling Crown's corporate leadership. They're calling it a model case for systemic bias and financial misconduct." Ethan smiled faintly. "So it's official." "It's official," she said. "And there's more. 3 other hotel chains quietly contacted me this week. They've started reviewing their training programs. You didn't just win your case, Ethan. You changed the industry." He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just let the words sink in, the weight of them heavier than he expected. "That wasn't what I was trying to do," he finally said. "I know," Rachel replied softly. "But sometimes doing the right thing sets a fire you can't control." You lit one that needed to burn. Ethan laughed under his breath, a small tired sound. I guess so. By noon, the story had reached national headlines again. Not the scandal this time, but the result. News anchors called it the Moore effect. Lawmakers were proposing new transparency standards for hospitality businesses. Civil rights lawyers cited his case as precedent. He didn't go online to read any of it. He spent the afternoon in the barn fixing a broken gate, the smell of wood and oil filling the air. For the first time in months, his hands were working on something simple, something that didn't require lawyers or evidence or cameras, just patience. Lily came out after school, her backpack slung low on one shoulder. "Dad, they're talking about you on the radio again," she said. "I figured," he replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "They said you might testify in front of the state legislature next month. Are you going to do it?" He leaned on the fence post and looked at her. "I didn't fight all this just to stay quiet now," she smiled and nodded. "Grandpa would be proud." He felt his throat tighten. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think he would." The weeks that followed moved faster than he expected. Rachel's articles were compiled into a documentary. It aired on a Friday night and was watched by millions. Strangers sent letters to the farm, some in envelopes, some handwritten on notebook paper. Stories from people who'd been turned away, disrespected or unseen. Each one started the same. "I thought I was alone until I saw what you did." The flood of voices became a movement. Advocacy groups formed. Petitions spread. And for the first time, people in power were being forced to answer questions they'd avoided for decades. But justice has a strange rhythm. It doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like the sound of a door unlocking somewhere far away. In December, Ethan received a letter from the Attorney General's office. The case against Sterling Crown had concluded. The company agreed to pay restitution, submit to federal oversight, and publicly report all future bias complaints. Paul Strickland was barred from holding an executive position for 10 years. Richard Hale, the man who started it all, had already vanished from the industry. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, the letter in his hands, a single tear sliding down his cheek before he even realized it was there. He thought of that day in the lobby, of the silence that had filled the room after Richard's words, of how he'd felt small for just a moment, before deciding never to feel that way again. When Lily walked in, she saw the paper and froze. "Is it over?" He nodded. "It's over." She hugged him, the kind of embrace that steals your breath and gives it back stronger. "Then we won, right?" Ethan smiled. "We didn't just win. We made sure the next person doesn't have to fight this fight." The snow began that night, thick and soft, covering the fields in white. The farm lights glowed against the darkness, warm and steady. Ethan sat by the window, staring out at the land that had carried his family through generations of storms. The phone buzzed again. One last message from Rachel. "They passed the bill. Transparency Act. Requires hotels to publicly report all complaints. It's named after you." Ethan read it twice before setting the phone down. He didn't need recognition. He just needed peace. And for the first time in a long time, he had it. Weeks later, he stood at the state capitol, invited to speak as the bill was signed into law. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted questions, but when he took the microphone, the room fell silent. "I'm not a politician," he said quietly. "I'm a farmer. I grow things. And when I planted this fight, I didn't know what would come out of it. But I've learned something since then. Justice grows slow, but it grows deep. And when it finally breaks through the surface, nothing can stop it." The applause was long and thunderous, but Ethan barely heard it. He looked up, past the cameras, past the lights, to where the sky opened like a promise. Later, when he returned home, the first shoots of spring were pushing through the frost. The earth was ready again. He walked through the rows, soil clinging to his boots, the air alive with quiet life. He thought of Rachel still chasing stories, of Lily filling out college forms, of the thousands of people whose names he'd never know but whose lives had brushed his in some small way. He thought of how it all began, with one man refusing to be silent in a hotel lobby that smelled like lemon polish and arrogance. He stopped, picked up a handful of soil and let it fall slowly between his fingers. Dirt. The same thing they once used to judge him. The same thing that built everything he loved. He smiled. You can't afford this, he whispered, not in anger now but in peace, because what he held wasn't just earth. It was dignity, hard-earned and unbreakable. The story of Ethan Moore didn't end in that courtroom or in the papers or on a screen. It lived on in every quiet act of defiance that came after, in every person who chose to document truth instead of bowing to silence. And somewhere in 1,000 different places, people carried his story with them, proof that justice doesn't arrive for those who wait. It arrives for those who stand. The wind moved through the fields, soft and steady, carrying with it the weight of everything he'd fought for. Ethan looked out at his land, the horizon stretching wide and endless, and said quietly, "We're finally home."